that if you were going to be assuming you were going to print something and perhaps like that's the right file size. But if you see the other ones that are down here, this is a great program if you're going to be posting to your Instagram story, or you're going to be posting to your Facebook cover or your profile. Or of course, you see there's one option for Ultra HD, 3840 by 2100. That's a lot of pixels. If you're working privately on your own device and you don't have any connection issues, Ultra HD is the best of the best. But since I'm doing this live and remote, I'm going to just go for regular HD, and I'm going to give it a title. This is important that when you teach your students how to use this program, that they exercise that nomenclature. How do you name your file? So this is going to be a live drawing that I'm going to do, and I'll call it V2, version 2, because I did want to create a new file. Of course, it would give you a lot of the same features where you could open up the document and set the sizes and give yourself that blank white piece of paper. It's going a little slow right now, so you can see, though, it's got that same splash with us to the Pixlr editor. File, edit, image, layer, select, adjustments, filters. All of these same file windows are identical in Photoshop as they are in Pixlr. The difference is that Photoshop is a program that's actually loaded onto the computer. I downloaded it. It's not running off of a website, so the file, edit, image is right up in the program window. And I'm actually going to close Photoshop because I don't need it right now for what you guys are doing here. We're going to just make sure I've got my browser open. Where Pixlr, you can see I have the browser file edit history option. Be careful. And I've made some classic blunders where I'm like, oh, let me X that file. I want to close it. And I actually closed my browser and lost all my work. So be careful when you're using these programs that you recognize that it's a program inside a program. It's inside your browser. All right, so I'm in a blank file right now. And let's get to the meat and potatoes of this. They hover over the tools. It tells you what they are. It even tells you the keyboard shortcut. If you were to click a letter on the keyboard, like the magic wand tool is the letter W. The healing brush tool is the letter H. The brush tool, which is what I'm going to be using, which is going to allow you to draw, essentially, is the letter B. And of course, the eraser is the letter E. When I want to zoom in and out, it's the letter Z on the keyboard. And a tool which allows me to move in and around my image. Now, I can't show all of these in one demonstration. They all have different purposes. So today I'm going to focus mostly on the brush tool. And when I click on the brush tool, you'll always see this with every tool, an options menu arises. So just for the sake of conversation, as I click on either the paint bucket tool, and I can fill the whole background, or you would increase the size of the brush. Now, if you increase the size of the brush as big as it'll go, you'll see how big it can be. And when you're filling something in, bigger is better for this, because I'm really just trying to make sure that I paint the canvas a color first. If I'm going to do a sunset, in traditional paints, yellow is the hardest to keep bright. So I would want to make sure I start with that. And then when I'm starting to fade colors, which I'm going to do this here, we're going to fade a couple of sunset tones using the brush. I'm going to go a little bit smaller than that so that I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to select the next color down in the range. So right here in the color picker, of course, I can select every tone that I want. But in the rainbow bar, you would slide this down. So if the color picker is up here in the right corner, you can just slide it down and it'll automatically find the next color in that range. Like, let's say I want to then fade yellow to orange. Hit OK. But recognize that if you start brushing, and I'll do it in the corner, if you start brushing at 100%, it's not that soft. If you have a light opacity and you're tapping and pushing a little bits of color, you can get that softness. All right, now I'm going to put my sun in right now. I'm going to go to pure white. And when I have pure white, and I'm at 40%, I'm actually going to fade myself down a little bit more. 18%, one click, is not that much. So when you're fading something in the center here, if I do it really lightly and I tap just a little bit at a time, I get that soft glow that happens from the sun anyway. And maybe I drag it in a little bit of a circular motion, but one click is 20%, too conscientiously going back and forth in my actions. Now, here's a cool tool that I think it warrants explaining. With your other hand, if you go onto the keyboard and you see the greater than or less than sign from math class and you arrow to the left, it shrinks the size of the brush in real time. I don't have to go back to the menu and select a different tool or drag the brush size here. I can very simply toggle on the keyboard bigger and smaller. which is a really wonderful advantage because let's say I want to start painting clouds, right? Your right hand is on the mouse or the trackpad and your left hand would reach up to tab the tool. It's nice to be able to just quickly have a hotkey. When you use Photoshop, it actually has hotkeys for all sorts of these features. When you're changing the size of the brush or changing the amount of color coming out, there's all sorts of cool hotkeys, which makes drawing very quick. When you're doing this on a web-based software that's free, it's a little slower in the sake of, you know, how much color can you get out of this, and you're waiting for the delay of the brush to accept, and then I've got some hotkeys. You also have the option to mask stuff off. So like, let's say right now I want to do the water, but I don't want to wreck my sky. And this is coming out okay. I might go a little more detailed in my clouds or put some flares of some sun rays. But let's say the whole lower section I want to chop off to be water. In Photoshop, there's a cool tool called the Marquee Tool, and Pixlr has it as well. The Marquee Tool, what sometimes I refer to as the marching ants, creates what's called a selection. And in this selection, if I'm brushing inside of it, it will not allow you to paint outside. It's like putting masking tape down. So let's show this in a perfect example. Like, let's say that I'm working on the water for this, and I want to reflect some of what I did on the sky, but I want it to be streaky. I don't want it to be fluffy and cloudy because it's the choppy surface of water. So let me go ahead and select the color that I was already using, and you can see the tool next to the magic pressure. That would be destructive if I didn't have a mask layered in. And using that Marquee tool gave me a color zone, an area that I could stay inside, that it didn't matter how careful I was staying inside the lines because my sky is now a separate section. Now, there's a lot of etiquette in using Photoshop and in using these programs about layers and, you know, what's one section another and what's the best practices for the way you should work. I'm being a little bit simple in the way I'm explaining this because sometimes you might have the sky on one layer and the water on another. Now, for the sake of our conversation, I'm actually going to do that. Over on the right-hand side where it says layers, there's a little plus sign. I'm going to click on that and I'm going to add an empty layer. And in this empty layer, I'm going to draw over top of where I just illustrated. But recognize that the ants are still marching. The selection is still allowed in here, which means that even if I'm on this layer or this layer, that I still can't draw outside that selection. I'm actually going to do a good habit here. I'm going to name these. This is called my sky. And to access the menu in here, you right click on your mouse, and this is going to be the water. Now, when you set these, there's all sorts of transparencies and other options. Again, I don't want to get too advanced. I think we're already talking about a lot here. I'm going to scatter some sunset. And I want to grab some yellow. And then I go back to my brush. And I want to start to scatter a little bit of that glow. But let's make sure I'm at a light percentage so it doesn't look false. Because I have a selection and I'm on a separate layer, I'm controlling where the color is going. And I'm trying to make sure that it's still soft in some ways, but that it stays where I want it. Being a little bit of lag, I'm going to let my brush catch up to me. If you ever press too hard and you're like, oh man, I ruined it, sometimes just go back to the other color and then brush back into this. Now, hotkeys for the keyboard. The letter I went back to my color picker. So if I'm like, well, I need the color white because I want my reflection, or I need the color yellow, or I need the color pink, the letter I on the keyboard is going to give that to me. And then I go to B on the keyboard and I'm back to the brush tool. If I've overdone my yellow or I've overdone my pink, right? Selecting colors, going back and forth. And this is a little bit simple. Obviously, if I had a photograph to work from, I could probably get more articulate in what's happening. But as I'm brushing and I'm sharing with you just some of these tools, hopefully you experiment a little bit on your own. If you don't have a drawing tablet at home, be patient. It can still be worthwhile doing this from a mouse or a trackpad, and you get better the more you work. So actually, I want a little bit of that. And I want a smaller brush because when you do streaks, you want it to be a little bit skinnier. And I'm still at a light percentage, which is how I'm going to work. I want to be careful that I don't put too much down too soon. If you do too much and you work the way you would on paper or in paint, you're going to have a lot of lag. The program's going to take a long time to catch up to you. Because I'm doing a live drawing, it's also, I'm at the mercy of the Google Meet view, where it's kind of like giving me less bandwidth because I'm working in an active program and I've got connection with other users. So one more tool before I go back to the meet view a little bit and I get some input from you guys. I'm still with my selection open. This doesn't look good. I think it looks a little choppy. So there's another tool that I love to use that we'll see how well it goes when I'm actually working in it with delay. But the blur or the smudge tool, which is essentially like taking your finger and blurring the information, or the blur tool, which takes the pixels and just dissolves them, has the same scenario. It has a brush size. It has an opacity or a strength. And you can increase that brush size with the greater than or less than. So I'm going to blur this a little bit. And when you blur, maybe you do a little bit of a rotating momentum to it. Maybe you do a horizontal momentum, but it takes the pixels of color that are already there and it smooths them out. If you were to use the smudge tool, it does the same thing, but the smudge tool is very resource heavy, which means it takes a long time to use the smudge tool to catch up to what you're doing. And sometimes just softening what you did may take those variations of dark and light color and just smooth them out a little bit. I would keep going, but for the sake of my demo, we're at 10:28. I actually want to go back to the meet view in a moment, but I want to show one last thing. Let's say I want to go back to my sky and I'm like, oh, I wasn't finished with something and it's not letting me draw. I have it on. And I'm on another layer, which you can see I can turn that layer on and off to see what I just did. To get rid of the selection tool to be able to draw in the rest of the document, you have to go up to the select menu and deselect it. And then you can see it's actually left me a pretty crisp line here, just like masking tape would. If I was to draw without the selection tool right now, though, it would go all over, which means it would get in my sky and it would get in any area that isn't masked off. But this was on its own layer. And you can see just the illustration against a blank white page. There's not a lot I put on here. It's very faded light layers. It's interesting to see what it looks like with and without. Now I'm going to go back to the meet view for a moment because that's a lot of information. This program, that it looks like Photoshop, it works like Photoshop in the same way that you save, but recognize something. I have two layers. And if I want to keep what I was doing because I have to stop and come back later, this is an important part of the education. Don't close your browser yet. File, save, and when it opens, make sure you've given it a name and recognize the type of file. A JPEG is a universal format. Any device can open it. A PNG is a portable network graphic. Ones you use for transparent backgrounds for logos. The web quality one is just another version of this, but PXD, the Pixlr document, is the one I want to save that's going to keep my layers. And when I download this, and this is true for Chrome users also, Chrome users need to make sure they know where they put it. Find the name. Make sure you save it. It's going to end up in your downloads folder. That's fine. But when you go open it again, you want to find where you put it. If you don't do this, and I'm actually going to go to my desktop for a moment because here it is, Digital Landscape Practice, the live drawing. Here we go, PXD. You can't open this document in any program but Pixlr. And if I was to close this for the sake of our conversation, and I wanted to open my new image, it will recognize the PXD files, PXD, the live drawing. And of course, it opens it back up again, and it keeps my layers. If you saved, I don't know why it's green screen, but you can see the actual image of what I was just sketching with you guys. All right, I'm going to go back for a moment, and we'll close the click down the menu, save. Well, wait, what are these options? What am I supposed to save it as? So that's important that you take the time when you instruct students that you show them how to save. If you're just going to use Pixlr for your own usage and you just want to create with it because it's free Photoshop, get in that same habit. The PXD files are going to be larger because they contain layers, but they can only be opened in Pixlr. Like I have Photoshop. I can't open a PXD file in Photoshop, and Photoshop can open almost anything. It's a unique program that's set just for that. Now, I'm sorry that my screen timed out a little bit there at the end, but hopefully you guys are able to follow me with how do I use the brush? What's the appearance of the program look like? And if you have time, you should experiment more with this. Now, I'm actually going to pause my recording so we can just have a little Q&A outside of it. Anybody who watches this after the fact, I'm sorry about